Hafa day, everyone, and thank you for joining me for my talk today. My name is Anna Staudenmaier, and I am the new deer biologist on Rota, working for the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands Department of Lands and Natural Resources. And today we are going to talk about deer, specifically the species Rusa mariana, also known as the Philippine brown deer, sandbar deer, or Banadu in Chamorro. My talk, Balancing Cultural and Ecological Objectives for Invasive Ungulate Management, is going to be a presentation on my initial phases of invasive ungulate control on the island of Rota to prevent both plant extinction and retain harvestable deer populations. I know it's a long title, but with it, I'm trying to get an oversimplified set of questions that drive my work on Rota. Mainly, how many deer are too many, and how do we best manage them? Some of you might say that any number of deer are too many on an island where they were introduced, and many studies have shown the detrimental effects of introduced ungulates on island ecosystems, and this is very much true, and it's also true for Rota, but balancing ecological needs with economic and cultural needs is also very important. Simply put, people love to eat and hunt the deer here, so eradication, though ecologically favorable, is not really a feasible option for us at present. So a little overview. I'll start by talking briefly about the overall LPEP project and what that means and the new deer component of it. Then get into my deer research that I've managed to complete thus far and give a little teaser on next steps for my portion of the project. It's been gone over a couple of times now, but I'll hit it again just in case someone isn't aware. Rota is a part of the Mariana Archipelago. It is the second southernmost island in the archipelago, and it is the southernmost island in the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands. And LPEP is the LUTA Plant Extinction Prevention Program. Rota is known as LUTA in Chamorro, so that's where the name comes from. So who is the LPEP team? We're made up of our nursery technician, James Bomba, who gave a talk earlier in the week, our biotech, Joaquin, our Kindle program manager, Lisa Stokowski, and then myself, deer biologist. And so what do we do through the LPEP project? Rare and endangered plant conservation has been happening here since the 80s, at least in the form that we know it and practice it today. It was led by James Manglonia, and now it's led by James Bamba, but still under the guidance of James Manglonia. And so we're still collecting seeds, propagating them, outplanting them, and focusing on 3 main plant species, Cereanthes nelsoni, which is a large tree, also known as the fire tree, that's endemic to both Guam and Rota, and then Osmoxylon marianense, another tree species, and Misogynous rotensis, a low-growing plant that grows in the karst substrate, or in soil in the karst. And those 2 are endemic only to Rota. And so why are we working on deer if we're looking at endangered plants? There's a lot of deer damage to our endangered plants. In 2019, the project realized that it needed to figure out how to deal with all of these deer on island. They were starting to consume plants outside of their expected diets, as known by locals, clearing entire undergrowth and all of the regeneration of native limestone forests. They were even eating the heart of plants like pandanus, which is very sharp and fibrous and not a predicted forage item. And they also even were going so far as to push down the protective outplanting fences that we were putting up around our Cereanthes and Osmoxylon outplantings. So you can see some of the damage. There's an example of antler rubbing, which is also something that they will do to damage our outplantings and native trees. And then examples of eating any leaves that dare to grow taller than the fencing that we put around our outplantings. Cereanthes and Osmoxylon are affected by this. And so that's why they brought me on board to try to help get at this issue with the deer, try to understand it. And so now I'm working with various departments, researchers, and other stakeholders on Rota to study the deer and hopefully merge both scientific and local knowledge to find best management practices for everybody involved. So it was decided that the best first step would be to figure out how many deer there are on the island. And since it's impossible for me to physically count every last year, I'll be using remote camera traps to estimate the abundance of unmarked ungulates here. So those cameras, that's where all of these wonderful deer videos have been coming from, by the way. And so for the rest of the talk, I'm going to focus on that study design and preliminary results of the camera study, since I am right in the middle of sorting and pulling data from all of those videos at the moment. Abundance estimation of unmarked animals using camera trap data is a relatively new and active area of model development. So I had some options to choose from for models, but we have a limited amount of a priori information about the deer here on island that exists to help inform those models. So I was somewhat limited in that regard. There's no telemetry or movement data or anything like that for the deer on Rota. So with that said, I chose two models to try: distance sampling and the REST model, or random encounter and staying time. Both models have similar assumptions and require similar settings for the camera data that's collected at the camera sites. So I can try using both. So one of the biggest assumptions is that the camera sites are random in regard to the landscape and also where we expect to see deer. And so generated 65 random points across the island to start with that were at least 1,000 meters apart. Sub-selected 25 of those points. As you can see in the red dots, those are where they actually ended up. We only did 25 because I only have 30 cameras and I needed a little cushion in case something broke. And we also excluded those other 40 due to issues with accessibility. Rota's topography is pretty intense. Also private land ownership and location within one of the two villages, either Sinapalo or Songsong. We don't expect deer to be permanently living in people's backyards and in their driveways, so those weren't feasible sites, feasible habitat. So we were left with these 25 final camera sites. The cameras were intended to be deployed for approximately 40 days each. They were set to take 10-second videos with a 1-second delay, and upon retrieval, we recorded distance reference videos for those distance sampling models, and you can see me in action taking one of those reference videos here. And so now a little bit of the preliminary results. Again, analysis isn't complete, but we do have some camera deployment details. They were set out in the field between March 26th and April 7th and pulled from the field between May 10th and the 20th. We did deploy all 25. All 25 remained reasonably functional for the duration of their deployment. However, we're only going to be able to use 23 of those cameras' data for analysis because 2 cameras had an excessive number of vegetation triggers, that being a lot of grass just blowing in the wind over and over and over. So for those 23 usable cameras, the average length of deployment was 39.6 complete 24-hour days. And that ranged anywhere from 34 to 44 days, depending on the exact camera. We detected a lot of different species on our cameras, plenty of birds, cats, dogs, rats, even some people, a couple aga, coconut crabs, and a lot of deer. 92% of all detections of an animal were of a deer. So we had a lot of deer on our cameras. Those detections mapped out by camera site. The darker colors are cameras that did not have very many detections. Black was 0 or only 1 detection, all the way to the lighter colors, and yellow, this camera, we had almost 2,000 detections. So there were a lot of deer down in that area of the island. And these are the 2 cameras that we're going to have to exclude due to grass. We also have been able to pull activity levels from our camera data so far. So what time in the 24-hour day that these deer are active on the landscape. You can see that from about 6 a.m. to about 4 p.m., low deer activity. but kicks up at 4 and carries pretty consistently until it kicks up again around 2 a.m. and drops severely off at 6 or 7 a.m. We don't quite know yet, based on this set of data, if these guys are crepuscular or nocturnal, so that'll be interesting to see with future studies where activity levels lie. We've also collected a lot of really interesting life history observations that I'm hoping to use to try to understand reproductive patterns. We can see fawns and the ages of fawns in videos, and also we can see evidence of rutting, which is when the males are most eager to mate, with sparring and different stages of antler growth and regrowth and shedding. So next steps for my analyses: finish extracting data, those distance measures and staying times, and then pulling demographic information as well, like sex, antler, and age classes. Then I will do my abundance models, repeat everything in the wet season. So we have both seasons of the year covered, and then we should have island-wide abundance estimates for deer, which you can hopefully look forward to seeing the full results next year. And then future steps, once we have our model results, we'll move to make recommendations to change hunting regulations, and then hopefully through outreach, which I'm starting to work on currently, get local hunters to adopt the new regulations so we can reach maximum sustainable harvest, have a minimum sustainable deer population, and hopefully have some happier plants. With that, I would like to thank our funders, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the Office of Insular Affairs, the support of CNMI Forestry, specifically Rota Forestry, and the Department of Lands and Natural Resources, and lots of other people. That would take questions.